So I'm going to go ahead and get us started so I can introduce our next two keynotes. I'm so excited to have them join with us today. And this next keynote is going to be very much an interview style. So we really aim for it to be a conversation. So as we begin talking and discussing, do feel free to put your questions in the chat. We have our chat coordinator, Mimi, helping us out with chat today. And you've already heard John, he's keeping us on the ball with the time, but we're going to try and reserve at least 5 minutes at the end for questions for this next keynote, which is with our two fabulous keynote speakers, Timeka Drew, co-founder of our Academy and founder of Biko Flower, and Hilary, you co-founder of our Academy and founder of Our Dream. So Timeka and Hilary, thank you so much for being here. We're so excited to have you. I'm going to quickly read their bios here and then we'll jump into questions. Timeka is a social equity applicant and license holder in Los Angeles, California, and founder of Biko Flower, a premium flower line. She is also the co-founder of Our Academy, a 501c3 volunteer-run 13-week workshop and mentorship program for equity applicants and Black and Indigenous people of color cannabis entrepreneurs, and the VP of Strategy and Compliance at Stacks, Ease's plant-touching arm. Previously, Timeka was the EVP of Engagement for Forefront Ventures and was responsible for deploying their Catalyst Fund that was created to empower social equity applicants committed to community reinvestment by capitalizing and supporting them as they built their cannabis businesses. Hilary is the co-founder of Our Academy, a 501c3 volunteer-run pre-accelerator and mentorship and workshop program for equity applicants and independent Black, Indigenous, people of color entrepreneurs across the U.S. Hilary is also the founder of Our Dream, a media company that centers minority stories in cannabis with a hero interview series called How I Got Here, aka Hi, that features legacy operators and shares what their unique stories have been entering cannabis and how they are creating change in the industry. Over the past few years, Hilary has worked with equity brands as an advisor and has also worked as a consultant to help create equity programs within non-legacy cannabis companies. Prior to cannabis, she founded a marketing agency that worked with startup health and wellness CPG brands. Hilary and Timeka, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much, Morgan. And thanks for giving the heads up that this is an interview style. I was looking at that presentation and I felt like I just came to class without my homework.
No. Absolutely. Because you guys just have so much knowledge to share. And I think as our audience will find out, you're both so personable. So I'm so excited to interview you both and just to help spread the knowledge I know you guys will impart for our community. So to start off with, I would just love it if both of you could share your personal journeys to Our Academy and really talk to us about why it was founded.
Do you want to go ahead and start, Hilary, or do you want me to start? Well, I guess, I'll say personally, I got into the cannabis industry as a medical patient. Cannabis actually saved my life. So I was a part of the kind of legacy medical industry, and I was living in South Central Los Angeles when legalization happened in 2018 in California. And I was a low income at the time, working at a nonprofit, and really started to kind of learn about social equity licensing and licensing in general. And that's really where I started my journey as a social equity applicant myself, but also just kind of helping other people and exploring this new, really revolutionary way to look at how we consider who should be getting licenses and what new businesses in cannabis should be looking like and what they should be focused on, which I found really a big part of the work that I had previously been doing in the nonprofit space, working for economic human rights, working for climate democracy and climate justice, and really trying to connect the dots between all of the work that everyone is doing on the grassroots level to try to ensure that we are checking business and we are checking government and we are checking the forces that kind of create negativity in our communities. So a big part of Our Academy was Hilary and I originally kind of came together before we ever put together Our Academy and saw a lack of programs and projects in the space that were kind of respectful and actually engaging towards social equity entrepreneurs and underrepresented entrepreneurs. It was more, you had people in the front of a room who had information and knowledge, and they'd give it for a short amount of time to people who were all packing in the room, and then everybody would line up in a line hoping to kind of be able to speak to them for one moment or pass a card. And we thought it would be really important to start creating spaces where we were sitting at tables all together, sharing our experiences and having more of a back and forth so that we could build together in a more organic way. So that's really what we were trying to do with building our academy. And I think we were pretty successful in bringing together a lot of these different kind of aspects into a more grassroots community and networking program that would be a little bit more long lasting and hopefully have more long lasting effects for the entrepreneurs and the businesses that would become a part of it. And I'll let Hilary talk a little bit more about specifically why the moment in time of kind of when we brought our academy together and what was going on there, because it is an interesting story. And I think Hilary was the one that originally came to me with the idea. So I will let her share that.
Thanks, Timeka. Yeah, I mean, our academy, we launched it during COVID. So it was at a time when public and private programs were getting shut down. And I had a little bit more of an inquisitive approach, that being that at the time I had a marketing agency and was looking at the cannabis space and I'm originally from LA, but understood that there were very few companies that were being spoken about in the press that were actually owned by legacy operators or had any touch points with the war on drugs, which was odd to me. And so I kind of went about it kind of speaking and fielding as many questions as I possibly could with equity applicants and entrepreneurs that were in the space that were having a difficult time getting their brands out there or getting their names out there. And it really was because they just didn't have any venture backing or didn't have the network to support them. And so Timeka, based off of, I mean, she's an equity applicant herself, and she was going through at the time the LA licensing program, and was having a lot of issues as well. And so we basically said, if Timeka, who's incredibly plugged in the industry, is having a difficult time with financial partners or whatever it may be, and imagine how many other people are having these same problems. And because cannabis is incredibly fragmented and every municipality has its own program, it's difficult for folks to come together and knowledge share. So we created our pilot program, which was 13 weeks. And right now we're in the middle of creating courses that are evergreen as an LMS platform so that folks can actually tap into these resources in an ongoing fashion. Don't necessarily have to be on our workshops at 5 p.m. on a Thursday. So yeah, that's a little bit about us.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. And you've already just keyed up so many questions perfectly. So I hear you saying this term social equity applicant. So I'm just wondering, for those of us in the dark, can you just talk about what the social equity license is in the cannabis industry?
Sure. Social equity, the concept of social equity in cannabis was really created to allow for folks who have been disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs to allow them to have a pathway into being able to be a part of the industry. So often the same people who had these businesses previously in the legacy market, are not able to have businesses now in the traditional market, in the new regulated market, because perhaps they had a criminal background or they had a felony from the previous time. And now the new venture capitalists can come in and they can have businesses, and there's no trouble in that, and they're making a lot of money. Similarly, folks who were living in areas that were highly policed and their communities were just impacted. There were certain things happening in those communities that weren't happening other places, that were creating stress and creating a lack of economic opportunity. Some examples of this are, in certain neighborhoods that were highly policed and over policed and were often low income, you would have people who would be picked up for, in a traffic stop, and they would have a very small amount of weed, maybe one joint of cannabis on them, and that could get them put into jail. they now have a record. They might lose their job because they were on their way to their job when they got picked up for this cannabis. Maybe they were in school and they had to drop out of school, or they were kicked out of school because now they went to jail. Maybe they were unable to pay their rent because they were incarcerated for a certain amount of time, or their family member was incarcerated for a certain amount of time. So or they just maybe weren't even able to get a job because they weren't able to test clean, especially if they were a medical patient living in these situations. And there are a lot of stereotypes around cannabis use. So being able to create these programs to say, we understand that people who lived in a certain area, who had certain circumstances, or who were formerly incarcerated due to the war on drugs with cannabis, should have a little bit of help being able to be a part of the industry so that they are able to participate in a meaningful way, and so that they'll be able to create wealth through those businesses that they'll be able to reinvest in those communities that were damaged by the war on drugs. So I think a lot of these are wonderful concepts. They're not concepts that have necessarily been able to come to fruition all of the way, because it takes a lot of work to actually support entrepreneurs in the way that they would need to be successful. But that's why it's really important that folks like you and the cannabis industry experts and also social equity licensees all over the country come together to kind of be able to share this information of exactly what would need to happen on a municipal level, on a state level, on a federal level, to be able to create a program that would really actually support social equity.
Awesome. Thank you for that answer. So enlightening. And I think it really digs into this next question, which I know you guys have shared a few of these already, but, as information professionals, we're always looking for answers to pain points. And we know there's a lot of pain points for entrepreneurs across the board, right? In every industry, but it sounds like there's some very kind of special and specific pain points for somebody looking to start in the cannabis industry. So what do you see as the big pain points for entrepreneurs in the cannabis sector? And how do you feel like our academy addresses these with the people you work with?
I mean, I would say that you have all of the same pain points that you would have with any other industry. So raising capital, finding the right network, having the right education to support yourself. However, with social equity applicants specifically, if you are an impacted individual, naturally, you may not necessarily have had those resources and tools to support a higher level education. And so from a lot of other industries, you have a lot of folks that may have an MBA or have gone to business school or come from a consulting background. And with cannabis operators that were legacy operators, they're incredible with the plant. They know they have potentially a great network within their siloed communities. But they may not necessarily have the business acumen and the financial tools to have a conversation and be able to level set with people across the table. So that is a really big pain point, understanding even how to have access to and apply for these licenses in the first place, and understanding what compliance actually entails. Because it's one thing to have one regulatory body ensuring that your license is kosher, but it's another to have three and then having to run your business and still report to these organizations. So our whole thing is setting up entrepreneurs to understand what this industry and being a plant touching company entails. If you don't want to be a part of a plant touching company, that's totally cool too. There's a lot of ancillary ways to serve the cannabis industry. But I would say that, as librarians and other fellow entrepreneurs on this call, knowledge is power. And so we want to make sure that equity applicants and independent entrepreneurs have the right tools to understand all the different mechanisms that to support their businesses and show up on equal footing as potentially investors or other competitive multi-state organizations as well.
Yeah, I will just add to that to say, outside of all of the nitty-gritty compliance, regulatory problems, taxes, insurance, all of these different things that are very difficult to maneuver uniquely because we have a federally regulated Schedule I substance, and the 280E implications, the fact that, you know, you can't run the business as a normal business. There are all these different ways that you have to look at the finances. You also have the real problems of normalization and networking that are just critical for small cannabis businesses, especially. Just having the ability to understand on a historical perspective that cannabis and hemp have been successful businesses for, you know, throughout history, throughout time, and knowing that you're a part of that is something that's really unique. Additionally, having a lack of a network is just something that's really crippling for entrepreneurs, and having a network that isn't just going to be there for a 13-week program, but having a stable network that will be there over time as the business grows, and being able to work with people who might be really experienced in one area that you're not experienced in, and then you be able to share your knowledge in another area, so that you're not always just having to kind of pay for a really large group of experts to advise you constantly, because that's not something that's realistic for most social equity entrepreneurs. So just really kind of understanding what you know, the lack of resources, but also understanding that it's about a network and normalization, and not feeling inferior to the larger corporations that are coming in and really taking over large parts of the space. Really being able to work with other people through that kind of that complex of feeling like you know, you're not good enough is really important. Something that we tried to create with the community as well.
Yeah, and I think that's what is so special about our academy, is that sense of community you guys are creating. That seems like to be at the core out of everything that you do. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, again, because this is such a competitive industry, there's a lot of folks that are, I think, intimidated to ask for help or to work with other groups. And this has been oddly, it's been a great opportunity for a lot of different organizations that wouldn't necessarily be speaking with one another to come together for one mission, which is to help social equity applicants. And so we have a lot of folks that are mentoring mentees that, you know, and together and working together as pro bono consultants that wouldn't necessarily get on calls with one another sometimes. So that is the silver lining.
Breaking down those silos in the information world, we deal with that too. It's hard, but it's so necessary. So I'm wondering if you two can talk about maybe some specific resources that you all have found to be the most impactful, or perhaps you haven't found yet, but you feel are really needed for the entrepreneurs that you serve.
Timeka, do you want to go for this one?
Well, I mean, one of the things that I will say is that the main resources that folks who are coming into the industry are looking for are understanding the regulations and exactly what they need to be a part of the industry. And it's so different in every city, in every state. And even to qualify as a social equity applicant, it's very different from city to state. And there's really not a whole lot of great resources that kind of compile that information together or give a good idea of what that might look like. You know, for each city and each state, you can go in, you can search. But we did create a resource in the very beginning of our academy that lives on, our dream, that kind of helps give a little bit of an overview of the different states, where they're at, and what kind of programs are available within them. That kind of gives folks an idea, but just having a lot of resources that are helpful for other businesses have been incredibly helpful for cannabis entrepreneurs as well. A lot of the materials that came together for our academy around marketing, around putting together your business plan, around putting together a pitch, all of these things are incredibly critical in an industry where it's pretty much impossible to operate for very long without actually doing a real raise of a significant amount of money. So you're going to have to get there eventually. So being able to have access to those materials early, start to learn about them, start to unpack them, start to understand the terminology, which can be really confusing, is really important.
Yeah, so not to toot our own horn, we're launching these courses and a new resource guide next month. And we're also putting together, if you want to check out the site and subscribe for the newsletter, again, subtle plug, that we're putting together a social equity handbook for municipalities and social equity applicants and advocates to actually have something to go to their cities and states with on all of the different social equity programs that have come out so far and what has and hasn't worked. So that's more from the lobbying side and how to be your own lobbyist. But on the entrepreneurial track, we are creating courses on how to read regs, what to look out for when you're applying for a license. With Kika Keith, she's a social equity applicant in LA. And Timeka is helping on that as well, obviously from her vast perspective of working as a phase 3 round 1 social equity applicant in LA as well. But there is a newsletter called The Broccoli Report, which is by Lauren Yoshiko and Broccoli Magazine. And that's a great resource. It's a bi-weekly newsletter, and she compiles a ton of cannabis news and it lands in your inbox twice a week. That's been pretty awesome. And Inclusive Base, which is by Can Inclusive and Almost Consulting, that is also a database of businesses by BIPOC, Asian, and LGBTQ founders across the country for folks who are just trying to reach out to their own networks. I found that that's pretty helpful as well, just to get to know a few folks.
And I want to shout out many thanks to planning team member Carrie is dropping these, and I think I've seen Hilary dropping them too, these links into the chat, and they're also going to appear on our collaborative document, so you guys can grab those. I definitely want to save some time because I know we have some Q&A coming in through the chat, but before we turn over to that, I'm just curious. First of all, is this your first time meeting with a group of librarians to talk about this topic?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
So thank you for this intro. It's a very niche group.
It is a super niche group. Hopefully we can see how it can connect. And I'm just wondering, how could you see us as librarians as hopefully more mentorship programs like this kind of spread across the country? Because it sounds like mentorship is such a crucial thing for any entrepreneur, right? But especially in this space. So how can us as librarians and information professionals, how can we help serve entrepreneurs in this space?
I mean, I think, Timeka, and jump in here, but pointing people to the right resources, obviously asking them if they are trying to be plant touching or non-plant touching, because that obviously changes the game and your course of action from how you're going to do research and how you're going to actually interface with this industry. Because obviously it comes with a lot of taxes, insurance problems. Have they read their ordinance and their city or state regulations? I think I was speaking about this with a group of students the other day. I would say 60% of people in this industry, would you, Timeka, that have not read their city or state regulations?
I mean, I would say higher than that. I would say
Okay.
80%. I'm in rooms all the time where I'm the only person in the room who has read the regulations. You know, obviously that's my job, but it's still a bit astounding.
It's crazy. And there's I'll put it in that document, Carrie, but there's a site called CanaRegs that I think it's called, I forget what it's called now, but it aggregates all of the different regulations and updates so that you can stay up to date with your local municipality, which is incredibly helpful. And then let people know to get those Google alerts going. It's easy and it's free.
And, you know, one thing I'll add, as I was thinking about this question, I really think that for me, the most exciting thing that could be coming out of our libraries and librarians is some of this mining for the history of cannabis and hemp, and helping kind of uncover some of those stories, because, you know, we're doing a lot of battles when it comes to building these businesses, but we're also doing a lot of battles when it comes to normalization and really getting people to renegotiate how they see this plant and how they see people who interact with it and have businesses and rely on it for recreation and for their medical needs. And I just think that this history is there, but it's hidden from us for so long because it's been this taboo topic. And I think that librarians are in a really unique position to be able to help kind of bring some of that up and package it in a way that's exciting for people, because I think that this is really a time where people want to know more about the history of cannabis, even the spirituality behind the plant. What did this plant mean to cultures, you know, hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago? What have we, you know, done? What is the path we've taken with this plant, the good, the bad, the ugly, so that we can understand a little bit more the history and be energized to move into the future with all of this knowledge. Because I feel like that lost knowledge is a lot of what has been making it difficult when it comes to normalization.
I love that. A call to action. I'm feeling it. I love it. Okay. So I'm going to call on my good friend, Mimi. Mimi, hopefully you're there and have been capturing some of these questions that I know have been coming through. So Mimi, can you help cue us up with some of the questions coming in through the chat?
Sure. One question is, I am a social equity applicant. I am hoping to score a license in New York. My first arrest was for cannabis. I'm a vet who was discharged because of cannabis. I grew up in the South Bronx during the 70s and 90s. No business education. What can I do? What Hilary is talking about, that this was earlier in the conversation.
I don't know what I'm talking about either. So, thank you. So you can definitely tap into your New York community of lobbyists and community organizers out there. I would check out CanInclusive if you're on the East Coast. There's an organization called SMART as well, which is brings together students across the US and provides them resources that everybody cannot have access to. It doesn't necessarily have to be students. And yeah, I mean, I would also check out your, just keep up to date with what's happening in terms of the regulations out there.
I'm going to jump in and say there's 5 minutes remaining.
Thanks.
One question I had that's related to this is, is it helpful for people to have the records expunged?
So having your records expunged is, you can get it expunged or not. Usually to be able to be qualified for social equity with a record, it has to be an expungible offense is what it will say. So whether it was expunged or not, if you can prove that it was an expungible offense, that would be something that would allow you to be qualified. And those qualifications look different everywhere you go. And that was one thing that I was going to say about New York, is that, you know, they're still kind of setting the social equity programs up in New York. So this is actually a really awesome time to get involved. As a veteran, you can definitely start being a part of these conversations as they're having public meetings about what things should look like. Make sure you go when you're allowed to speak and talk about, as a member of the community or as an entrepreneur that's interested in the space, talk about your needs specifically, and they'll be building programs based on this feedback that they get. And we have seen one thing about the social equity space that's really amazing is that even when a program is set up, if the people let the regulators know, look, this isn't really working all the way, maybe we need more support, maybe it should look a little different, change can happen. So it's really a matter of making sure you're getting in there and being really communicative as the programs are getting set up, which is what's happening right now in New York, so that the programs can be as robust as possible.
Just one quick tip for when you're applying for a license as well and trying to actually change and help shape what an ordinance could potentially look like is, specifically with cannabis, showing up for your town halls and your town hall meetings has been incredibly instrumental from what I've personally seen for our mentees who have or haven't gotten licenses. It's almost like showing up for class and engaging with your professor or your teacher. They're gonna actually, they want to help you. You just actually have to be able to get out there.
Great. Okay, another question. In New Jersey, both medical and recreational cannabis is legal. However, there is a home rule in New Jersey, meaning that each city, township, borough can decide if they will allow cannabis entrepreneurs to set up in their city. Individually, cities, townships have until August to officially decide. Do you know if Long Beach will allow cannabis entrepreneurs to set up their cannabis businesses?
I have no idea about what they will specifically do. However, one thing I will say is that This is one of the things that we've seen in the state of California as well. And you definitely see folks challenging this. So there will definitely be lawsuits as certain cities begin to ban cannabis activity in those cities. You will have different folks suing those cities to try to open that up, because the folks within those cities do have certain rights as well. So there are definitely legal battles that happen here. So just know that even if one day a city decides that they might not allow for cannabis entrepreneurs, the next year that might change. There might be something that changes within the actual voting in that city. There might be a lawsuit that happens and they decide to change that. So just know that things are kind of always changing in cannabis until we have federal legalization, and then it's done changing, which is a little ways off, I think.
I also think, the answer to your first question was valid here, because maybe there'll be some way that these, the Long Branch will allow public input. And so people should be aware of that and stand up here and let their voices be heard. Another question, is there a list of all social equity applicant companies? In other words, that could be promoted or shared?
So CanInclusive has a database called Inclusive Base, and you can break it down by Black, Asian, LGBTQ owned, Latino owned, but not necessarily, I don't think, social equity. I think there may be a field for that, but Timeka, do you know anything? Oh, Original Equity Group has a seal called the Equity Trade Certification, and they're working to actually have a seal that's similar to a non-GMO verified certification on packaging to show what is a social equity brand on shelves or company. And so you could also check out their website.
And that was
there are also, I will say, go ahead, Original Equity certification.
Okay.
Yes. And then one thing I will say is that there are some companies who are offering support to social equity through menu support and brand carousels. So for example, on the Ease menu, they do have a social equity carousel, and you can search for social equity on Ease as well. And you'll be able to find all the brands that are carried in your area or in any different zip code that are social equity. They have women-owned brands as well. And I imagine that there are some other retailers, large retailers who have similar programs and carousels.
This is also the marketing person in me. Biko's on there as well. So if you want to go check out Biko flower, you know what to buy.
Sorry, I was thinking the whole time you were talking, I was like, am I in the CanInclusive database? I don't know. I don't have my equity trade certification yet. I definitely am. Great.
Oh, Hilary and Timeka, this has been so fabulous. Thank you both so much. I know there were questions we didn't have a chance to get to. What's the best way for people to reach out to you to find out more about our academy and to ask any other kind of follow-up questions?
You can hit us up in the DMs. I run our social media account. It's at this. I'll drop it into the chat. Timeka is also on social media. You can also hit us up.
Add me on LinkedIn. Happy to be friends on LinkedIn and chat anytime. You can also email me. Always very happy to kind of be building this cannabis community and working with folks. Really appreciate being here today.
Awesome.
Speaking of pun, our email is hi@thisisourdream. So there you go. Hashtag.
I love it. Perfect. Hashtag.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you, Timeka and Hilary, so much. This has been so wonderful. So for everyone, we're actually going to take a brief, about 5-minute break. We're going to come back at 2:15. Feel